You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Owen.
I'm still SavageMick.
And I'm Scarr, sometimes a warlord, sometimes a lover.
Fair enough.
He met me spit
And
my
today-
sourdough bread. Okay.
Fair enough. And today, we are here to discuss hit points and why they mostly suck. Wait, hit points? Ugh, I hate hit points. First off, what are hit points? Are hit points an abstraction of how tough you are? Or are hit points an abstraction of your script immunity and ability to dodge? So is a guy with 300 hit points so tough that when an axe hits him, it doesn't break the skin? Or is a guy with 300 hit points so tough that when an axe hits him, he just dodges at the last second and doesn't actually fully connect? And if that's true for a fighter with 300 hit points, is the same true for a dragon? Is a dragon basically just dodging at the last second all the axe blows? Or are you hitting the dragon and it bounces off the scales because it's a dragon that's giant and tough? Like, which is it?
But, Owen, if it represents script immunity, then it's not a simulation. It's some narrative bullshit.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, yeah, tell me your system isn't a simulation without telling me your system isn't a simulation. It is.
But hit points are a terrible simulation of reality. That's not how people work.
Yeah. No, true.
You don't, like, most hit point systems, you fight at full effectiveness until you fall over. That isn't how most people work. People get tired and get worse and worse and worse until, they fall over.
But isn't how movies work, though? In a movie,
Okay. We have to start from position here. How many RPG players have been in regular, serious fights? Fist fights out in the real world.
Real world fist fights, no. No. So there have been LARPers that swung rubber swords around and been told how to not, knock each other's glasses off, but they're not in fist fights. No, I don't think that's generally a thing.
Fighting's incredibly tiring. If you fight for any length of time, you start to get more and more tired. And the more proficient the two combatants are, the more exhausting it is, because they will try tactics to try and wear out and disrupt the other person's defense, which are often intensely tiring. Look at boxing, look at MMA. How long are the rounds there? 15 minutes? 20 minutes?
No. 3. 2.
3.
Yeah.
Why? And some of those fights, right, are like, we couldn't do a 3-round fight. We could do a 2-round fight, not a 3-round fight. Why? Why is it so? Because you're going maximum effort, right? And you cannot fight for that long. You cannot fight like that for an extended period of time. Now, RPG kind of plugged this by having a round be 6 seconds or 10 seconds or 1 second or half a second, But in reality, fighting's exhausting. And as you get if you were genuinely going for a simulation, fighting should be exhausting, and your ability to defend yourself should degrade over the course of the round as you get more and more tired. Defense should be a bigger and bigger issue. And connecting and doing maximum damage should start to become a bigger and bigger issue. But no RPG actually wants to be a full simulation because it's too hard. What they want to be is kind of something that looks a bit like a simulation to someone who doesn't understand anything about the situation involved. Like healing. How many games put in rules for natural healing where you actually heal like, now my shoulder's just buggered. It just doesn't do this moving properly anymore. Is that a problem for me? Yeah, I've had to learn how to fight with the other hand because this is basically only good for holding a shield now. I can't do the motions I need for a sword thing. No one does healing like that. No one does critical wounds like that, Nobody wants to. Or very few games want to.
There are games that have crippling injuries, but they don't tend to be, those kinds of, subtle but life-changing things that you personally experience. There has to be things that, everyone can see, like your arm gets cut off, or they punch out your kidney, and, it tends to be big dramatic stuff as opposed to the much more often stuff is just like, well, I can't sleep for more than 3 hours anymore because the scar tissue in my back just keeps waking me up.
Okay, so if
I slept slightly funny last night, so I'm useless for the next 3 days, guys. Sorry. You're our fighter. Yes, but I'm just going to have to walk like this for a little bit.
sleep in your armor.
Yeah.
So, but that begs the question: like, what is if this is not good enough as a true to life simulation? Okay, but what is good and useful and interesting to simulate in a real system?
I think hit points are fine if you're doing a very cinematic, low realism focused game where people are fine until they fall over. Which you can do a lot of games with, right? But if you wanted your game to be a little more kind of gritty and realistic, which everybody says and very few people mean, if they genuinely want that, I think you need to start looking at making some changes to it. I'll give you the example. If I wanted to run Dark Sun, I would make substantial changes to the hit point system of D&D. I would make substantial changes to it. Because I don't think hit points represent Dark Sun terribly well. And I don't think it represents what it should feel like playing in a Dark Sun game. And here's what I change. There was an old system in the D20 edition of the first D20 edition of Star Wars, which came out in the early 2000s. And it was called Wounds Fatality. And in it, you had wounds equal to your con score, and vitality points equal to your class's effectively hit dice plus con modifier. And when you got hit, the vitality represented your ability to defend or dodge at the last second until it ran out and you started taking wounds, and wounds gave you a penalty to doing anything. And if you got hit with a critical hit, you took wounds. It represented the fact that in Star Wars, nobody gets hit until they get hit and actually injured. So everyone's dodging and blocking the lightsaber blasts or blocking the blaster bolts and not getting hit until they get hit, at which point they're genuinely hurt. Now, it was an interesting idea from a kind of matching the narrative of the setting. It didn't actually work terribly well in Star Wars because what would often happen is someone would get critted and they get hit by a weapon that's so hard enough to kill them. It didn't kill them because he spent a force point. Or it would just injure them. And they'd be very vaguely annoyed, limping around injured for an extended period of time, which also wasn't very Star Wars. So it was actually a bad fit for Star Wars, but I think it would have been a good fit for a more gritty game. So if I were running something like Dark Sun, I would have damage do mostly to vitality, except for certain critical hits. And I will put in a wound table to roll on when you took wound damage to 0. So it wasn't an automatic death. It was like, okay, now we're on the crit table, you know? And we roll on the crit table. And the other thing I'd do is I would consider making everything you do in combat cost a little bit of vitality. So moving would cost vitality, attacking would cost vitality, casting a spell would cost vitality, everything would cost vitality. And then I'd say, players would be like, okay, so how do we get it back? Do we just rest? And I said, okay, you get a little bit for resting. You get more for resting if you drink some water. You get more for resting if you have shelter. You get more for resting if you have food. And that's how you get hit points back. And healing will do a little bit of vitality recovery and a bit of wound recovery. So healing becomes powerful, but not very good at actually getting you back in the fight. So it becomes a situation where you need rest. You need mounts. You need water. You need resources, and you're running out of water. You can get rid of, like, create water as a cantrip or whatever and be like, yep, you need water now. You fought 4 fights and you're nearly out of water. You need to get some water from somewhere. Now, what is that doing? Is that taking the next thing you kill and sticking it up on poles and draining its blood out to get yourself some water so you can drink? Is it attacking a caravan because you need the water? It'll make you more desperate. And then you get into stuff like defiling, like the wizard, like, okay, what do I do now? And I'm like, okay, you can't recover spells until you have a rest with water, and like amount of water. What else can you do? Well, you can defile and get it back that way. You can drain some life force from the planet and get it back that way. And you actually go, now I'm actually tempted to do that. So I would look at it as you can tweak or should be able to change your wound rules to better reflect the setting. Because I don't think base D&D does a very good job with hit points of replicating Dark Sun, and I think you could get a much better Dark Sun out of that.
Not so, but then that leads back to the point: is where do we get hit points in the first place? Well, to be honest, we got it because it was sort of a kludge between naval warfare rules and fantasy Conan-esque battling where people are dying left and right except Conan for some reason. But yeah, like the wound system that you have will affect the type of game you have. Very, very much so, and people. Did you think about it? Like I have my own pet theory about why not. I know where, as I said, I know where hit points came from, but why have they stuck around?
They're simple.
They're simple.
They're understandable. Okay, I'm at 50 of 100 hit points. I'm on about half health. People can easily parse that. I'm on 75 of 90. I'm on 10 of 120. They can kind of understand that. It's relatively simple. It's the addition and subtraction levels of math.
They're easy to program. Like, why is you could say hit point or health points to almost anybody, no matter what their experience in role playing or otherwise, and they'll kind of know what you're talking about because they've experienced it in some other place, be it a reference in a cartoon that they watch, or playing video games, or seeing it in a meme. It's, I'm on half a heart. Everyone would understand what that means. It's a very simple abstraction of what should probably be, as Owen points to, at least a 2-track system, if not more. Hell, play Minecraft now and you've got hit points, armor, and hunger. And each of those will dictate how survivable certain actions are. Not just to fight, but can I jump off this cliff? Can I afford to stay underwater much longer? Should I eat this rotten flesh? So there's, or hang this body from poles. I don't really like them, and I think there's another pool of attributes that are sitting right alongside them that doesn't really get touched in D&D these days, and that's the ability scores, from which hit points are derived. Or at least they used to be. And in many systems they are. Like, if we want to talk about wound and health systems, why we don't leverage the core attributes in many systems more often strikes me as a pertinent question. They're big levers to pull that make for significant changes.
They're probably gun shy after ability damage in 3.5 was a mess of having to continually recalculate your stats and having a knock on. So they got nervy about that, because if you did someone's strength damage, I have to recalculate this as melee attack bonus, melee damage. Okay, fine. If you do someone con damage, you got to recalculate their hit points, you got to recalculate their fort saves, you got to recalculate. Is there any skills to use con in 3.5?
I think concentration was a skill.
Yeah, concentration, and I think maybe one of the psychic body control ones for psionics.
Auto hypnosis or something.
You've got to recalculate a bunch of stuff, whereas you sometimes get other ones like Pathfinder 2nd Edition does it by having a condition effectively linked to each one of the stat things. So clumsy reduces your AC and your reflex saves, and a penalty to agility-based or dexterity-based skill tests. So they do it a bit like that, where, okay, you don't have to recalculate this, you just have this penalty, and just remember, here's the penalty, you're enfeebled 2, so it's -2 to strength-based checks, strength checks, damage, and so on.
Yeah, I can think of a few ways to work around it. Now, my usual canned response to that is the digital character sheet does that instantly and effortlessly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
absolutely.
to address but that's I get the machine to do it for me. I think you could do it certainly by bracketing it, by saying, look, losing more, so track current attribute versus its norm, and say normally my con is 12. I've taken 4 con damage. That's a third. Taking, or dropping below certain levels in my current. I take this conditional modifier. I suppose it would reduce hit points in that case. Or if I took damage to Dex, it would drop my AC by an easily sort of remembered and applied amount, rather than flowing or cascading the recalculation through the table. It's still abstraction, but it's, to my mind at least, a much more satisfying abstraction than am I on 1 hit point or am I on 0 hit points.
I generally would agree, but again, with the caveat that that's much easier to do. Bookkeeping becomes much easier when we, the glorious future where the VTT is the core game. But, well, yeah, there's the bookkeeping thing, which is like a lot of people don't want one number. Just, this is the number, 1 to 100, or 1 to 50, whatever. I just adjust this, I'm fine, don't need to memorize anything else. But, like, there are systems which don't even have that much. You just have sort of state. Savage Worlds comes to mind, where for 90% of characters you're going to meet, they are either fine, on the ground yelping, or dead or dying, and that was designed for their fast, furious, fun mentality. It's just like for 90% of people, tracking their hit points is just busy work. We just want to know are they inconvenienced or dead or fine.
But that comes out of it originally being a war game. Because it was originally Great Whale Wars, the war game, and they just adapted that system to the RPG because they're like, hey, this is good at running large-scale combats, because base Deadlands was terrible at running. 20 gunmen versus your posse was a disaster to run. Whereas you wouldn't feel very heroic because you often get punked out by a couple of lucky shooting rolls. Whereas in this one, it's like, actually, we can take on 20 guys with R6 and it will take half an hour to resolve, rather than at least this session, maybe some of the next session. So that's that was a major factor in their design change. And that, I think that's grand. If you're looking at, okay, I want quick play, I want to be able to take on a large amount of bad guys with a small amount of heroes. Doing a system like that is a good idea. I thought minions with 1 hit point were a good idea. If they're relatively hard to hit, that's good. It means you have to be careful about some things, but it was a good idea and it was a way to do it. And I've also seen things like scaling up AC dramatically. You go, oh, that's terrible because lower level monsters aren't a threat. And I go, yeah, they aren't a threat. That means you can put them in effectively like mooks where you just cleave through them, But it's
pushes the busy work back over to the DM, who's now tracking 70 goblins. And really, what he should probably do is track a couple of goblin mobs who do pose a threat. So, and there's rules. I think there's even alternative rules in the current edition of D&D that cover that. All right, let's cleave to the core of this. Hit points. Hit points aren't much good. There are perhaps existing ways of existing attributes or other things the characters use that could be used in conjunction. Any novel approaches? Anything else we could attach? If we want to be additive. I think a stamina counter that isn't like that. Just how much puff do you have left, or costing out maneuvers, things like that. A lot to be said for that.
Yeah, but again, it's the tracking things that people very often want the effect that the price is like. If you were doing that kind of system, you would very, very much want to say, well, at the start of your turn, how many stamina points are you striking off, rather than start with what's your action. And that may be a change of philosophy that people aren't particularly in a rush to do.
Well, it comes down to, is it worth tracking and why? And I suppose if I wanted to put a stamina system in, it wouldn't necessarily be to figure out how tired players were. It'd be to figure out how much stress and strain they were willing to suffer to do something cool. Like tie it more. it becomes less of another thing that has to be protected, and it's more, here's a pool of available points to do cool stuff with. Now, here's a bunch of cool stuff to do, but you're limited by the number of points you have. So think about conserving it. Think about it like you would not a real fight, but think about how you would any other pool that is kind of vital to your success, but has to be expended.
I get that, but like
spell slots.
Maybe, yeah.
Like spell slots are a stamina bar, effectively. Like, how many of these can I afford to cast today? Is this the right fight to do it in? And what am I leaving myself open to if I use these now rather than save them for later? Or can I go hog wild?
You know the way you get it? You occasionally get an argument about, why don't I just cast this really powerful spell all the time? Or why doesn't my martial character just do all this super attack all the time? Why is it twice per day? If you went and said, right, casting a 9th level spell costs you 20 hit points. Or 20 vitality. Is it easy to get back? Depends. Depends the situation. You're getting a chance to rest, or you're getting a chance to take a break, drink some food. Yeah, you might get that back. Or you go to the fighter, like, you can do your regular attack that costs you 5 stamina, or you can do this whirlwind attack that hits everyone in range for double damage. That costs 40 stamina. And the player will figure out very quickly why they don't just spam that attack. You can do stuff where you can build, like, hit points shouldn't be the default assumption, and they often kind of are in a lot of games. White Wolf did wound levels, which led to an issue with, and Elf of War did them as well, which is led to an issue with Death Spiral, where it gets harder and harder to do something the more hurt you are, which is accurate but frustrating to players.
Yeah.
Terra Banshees Zero, which was an adaptation of a Japanese RPG, did wound boxes where when you got injured, you could mark one to give yourself a bonus to attacks and damage, and you could mark a second one to make a bonus to attacks and damage, but if you took another one, you died. So it was a choice when your character died. You got better and better as you got more desperate. So you can do interesting things with that. It's the reason to do hit points is often so you can actually do, rather than say, well, why don't you just say everyone's got 5 health levels rather than these 320 hit points? Is the reason you do it is because people like rolling dice for damage, and if you want to roll dice for damage, you need a big enough pool of hit points to absorb. You can't be, everyone's got 5 hit points. What happens to D6 damage? What's your point?
Yeah.
You basically need you need the cushion of a large number of hit points to guard against a couple of bad rolls taking you out, or one bad roll taking you out.
Yeah.
And that's why low-level D&D is often so dicey.
Like, there's this dichotomy here of what's good for the goose, good for the gander, is like, very often, like, if you let people off the hook, they'll have a situation where they have loads of hit points, but the monsters have got like 1 hit point each. I made my roll. I slow them. Or more often they'll have, like, monster has a very achievable amount of hit points and they have so many damage bonuses, and they just mulch them, and it's therapeutic for some reason to do 32 damage to a 10 hit point goblin.
But it's a game design thing. Your choice about hit points is a big game design, a big setting design choice, an advantage to consider. Just doing hit points because everyone does hit points is dumb. You should go, what do hit points tell me about fights in this world? If you have piles of hit points, easy access to magic healing, right? It means that people will fight a lot more in the setting. Both in the setting and in play, because it's not risky. That's a choice you made. The violence is low cost. As long as you win, you're fine. And some players want that. That's great. And some settings reward that. Like if you're having a kind of a high energy kind of, high sword and sorcery, okay, we're just going to kill all these guys. That's fine. It's absolutely fine to have it like that. Good choice. Whereas if you want a game where fighting is dangerous and you want recovery times, you want to drive some play, like I look at Dark Sun, the biggest failure for Dark Sun for me in every version of D&D is it never feels desperate. It never feels hard to survive. The dangers are the threats you encounter. The danger isn't the world. And the world should be the danger. How hard it is to survive should be the danger. It should drive your feeling of, okay, we're going to do some stuff that we'd feel appalling in another game because we need that water or we need that food. We need it to recover to do this other thing. You want to drive play like that. Go, okay, it's hard. Yeah. It's dangerous. Yes. I've been in games when fights are dangerous. Right? And you pick your fights a lot more carefully. And it's a choice when you do that. Like, it's a very important game design choice, and I think hit points are a lazy fallback that are simple.
Perhaps going back to the Savage Worlds example, what do we say about games which very deliberately treat the PCs different from the NPCs and the monsters? For example, I assume in your example of Wounds of Vitality Dark Sun, you would not be tracking, the vitality, the I spend 3 vitality to do...
Oh, I would. I'd find a way to systemize it easier, though, for the bad guys.
Yeah, this is like right? Legendary actions.
So there would be bad guys who... If they're just doing move and attack, you have a number right at the top and you go, okay, -10. Don't have to do the individual bits for them. And basically, I would do the same because you can not do it, but it's effectively asymmetric, and it would drive things like the GM realizing the bad guys can just stand back and shoot arrows at these guys because it doesn't cost them anything, or move away and shoot an arrow. Whereas you'd have to do it for them as well, but you'd need to simplify it for the bad guys. That they'd have like 3 choices in their turn, like a 10 vitality spend, a 20 and a 50 or something, and go, okay, well, this is what they do. Every turn they do one of these 3, and that if it's 10, they move and attack. If it's 20, they move and attack twice. If it's 50, they move and cast a spell. And you do something like that. You'd have to make it symmetric in that. I don't mind there being asymmetry between players and monsters, right? Now, what you could do is you could give monsters lower hit points, but then you run into the problem of, well, the monsters don't get tired, and we do. And the monsters should probably get tired. And then when you fight a monster that doesn't get tired, it scares the hell out of you. Because let's say you start fighting undead, and they don't spend to attack, and they don't spend to move. They just keep coming. Undead are suddenly a different type of bad guy to fight. And they can suddenly start doing things to you like, every turn the zombie pushes me. Is that a problem? It means I have to move back to hit him again every turn. Or every turn he grapples me and I have to spend 5 vitality to break the grapple to do my attack. They're taxing me.
Yeah.
And they're not getting tired.
Wearing you down.
Yeah.
Reflecting on the idea of bonus hit points, there's an inverse there. That would, you could keep your 1 track of health, the hit point, but by taking temporary hit point damage, you're not actually losing the hit points, but you're losing access to them in that fight. You could again, play with costs for specific actions. So barbarians get temporary hit points for kind of raging out, right? Usually. Yeah. So the inverse of that would be, take temporary negative hit points to pull off a salmon leap or a berserk axe swing. Not necessarily. If you win the fight, great, you get to recover them. But if you go negative in the course of the fight, you just collapse from exhaustion. You're not taking death saves. You're not actually dying. And when you get back up again, assuming your friends win the fight, you won't be at 0. You'll be at whatever the recovered.
You see, I think you'd be better off doing they just spend, and if they're at the end of the fight, you give them some bonus recovery. From the kind of adrenaline they're carrying out, because that's simpler to...
Yeah, you don't have to track as much.
Simpler to count. You don't have to go, okay, I've got this hidden penalty. No, just knock it off, and then at the end of the fight, remember that you gain a bonus on your recovery.
Take some sort of shit. So we could potentially stay with the single track for a player's health, but there's a lot of potential to make it a lot more interesting. My instincts would be that, I remember playing with Wounds Vitality, and I really liked it. I think it's a really strong way of playing. not necessarily always for the genre it might be plugged into, but it certainly represents some potential. My personal hobby horse here is start pulling on those attribute levers, because recalculation's easy in the digital age, and I think it's like there's a lot to be said for it. I think Numenera has something like that. It uses your 3 core stats as a sort of a push pull. But yeah, hit points as they stand, they're a weird abstraction in amongst a lot of weird abstractions. Even they stand out, and there's probably room to explore more.
I just want to talk one point. We're talking about encouraging a system where we're trying to encourage players to, take big hits. Like, can we make taking a real injury, like you're bleeding from one arm, or your leg's broken, can that be made fun with the right mechanical thing? So it's like, because we want, part of it is I feel like sort of part of the reason you put that kind of critical hit random table or woof up style escalation into game is to scare players. Like, very often in a woof up, you're very much encouraged not to have a fight because, well, if they get critical hit, roll that D5. Oh, all kinds of horrible things could happen. But can you actually sort of encourage, like the Tenra Bancho example that Owen made, can you encourage people, please accept this injury, it will make the game cooler? Like, what?
Fun is a difficult one to answer. I don't know if you can make it fun per se, because what's fun for one player is not fun for the other. Like, some player like the idea of, my god, my eye got cut off and now my ballistic skill's screwed. That's awesome. Some people like that. Other people like, my elven archer is ruined. Ruined by this happening. Like, if it's cosmetic, most people are fine. If it's got permanent negative effects on their character, most people are not fine. Or at least, if it's permanent negative effects on their character that impacts what they do, they're not fine. So, you could make it a choice, but ultimately, it's a difficult one. Like, if you chop off a player's arm, some players will be like, cool, I've got one arm. That's fine, I can do all my stuff with one arm. Other players will go, I've got my arm chopped off. My character's ruined. I use a two-handed axe. What do I do now? Can I get a prosthetic arm? And if you go, you can get a prosthetic arm, it's often cool. If you go, you can't get a prosthetic arm, you're like, can I retire my character now? And like, maybe someone wants, okay, I want to get an iron hand, which I can move with the muscles in my forearm to open and close, and I put a really strong magnet in the palm so I can hold my sword. And now I'm Guts from Berserk. And that's cool for them. But it depends on the person, and it depends on how you systemize replacement and stuff. If you do something where critical hits basically empower you in some way, you do kind of a limit break thing, you can absolutely do that, and that is cool. But you have to be kind of careful on your design there, that you're not incentivizing getting critted, so that you can do your ult. So you need to be careful. You need to be very careful with a lot of playtesting, Shane. Yes, but with a lot of playtesting. With a lot of careful design.
Same question. Is it fun to get hurt? Not directly, no. As Owen points out, there's players who go either way on it. It opens the game up to questions that aren't going to be directly answered by what vitality or exhaustion system you're using, because it feeds into the narrative. Like, am I now the one-armed samurai? Or am I grappling hook arm guy? Or do I have to adopt a different weapon set because of this untreatable crippling? That's going to get answered by the GM and the player. Perhaps there are some rules to support the answer, but a lot of it's going to come down to what can be agreed upon.
Savage, do you remember when you cut your own arm off in a game and the GM's got eyes bugged out?
I do.
Yeah.
And later on, he got his revenge by, after an interlude where we weren't sure what happened, the same character woke up to discover they had a mechanical leg as well.
Yeah.
What? That went unexplained for quite some time. You got to roll with it. It's
The GM was shocked. That was not the way he thought that was going to go.
Seemed like a good idea at the time. Is all I'll say to that.
Yeah.
So to continue, is getting injured fun? No, not necessarily. Probably never entirely in of itself. However, how you deal with it. I played a game where our sniper, very early on, took a bad injury to the leg, and our medic thought, this could be an artery nicked here. He can't stand up. And we spent 6 weeks trying to figure out, 6 sort of in-game weeks and quite a few sessions, figuring out different ways to deploy our crack sniper into combat in ways that it wouldn't require him to stand up. We rolled around a cart for 6 weeks in the game. And that was kind of this was sort of the agreed upon timescale for this to be healed, or at least no longer an immediate threat to his life where he'd stand up and bleed to death in 20 seconds. And was that character getting hurt by a random roll fun? Not necessarily in and of itself, but did it lead us into fun situations that have remained memorable years later? Absolutely yes. So there's something to be said for it.
Yeah, so a wound system with semi-permanent or semi-permanent injury should invite story potential as opposed to just bare mechanical.
On a different day, we might have left him to die. It's going to, some things aren't going to be answered by the system. We might have insisted that he get up and carry his load, and the GM might have told us that half an hour later he falls over dead. Time to roll a new character. That would probably have hacked off the player more than any other consequence that could have come from a crippling injury. But it goes to my point that the consequences of what the system tells you happens are only the start. How it's dealt with by the player, the GM, and the other players really decides whether it was in the round fun or not.
Yeah. I guess that's true. Well, Owen, do you have any closing thoughts?
Kind of what I've been at the moment. Hit points are a crutch that shouldn't be applied automatically. Sometimes they're the right thing, sometimes they're the wrong thing. Have a think about it and have a think about what kind of gameplay they drive, because they're one of the most direct ways that the GM interacts with the players is by doing damage to them. It's a low-level way. It's a relatively often low-impact way. It's a way to do stuff to the players in a way that isn't kind of a personal attack, or isn't to things like, you take some damage. Rocks fall, Jesus saves, all the rest of you take damage. So you need to be thinking about them, what kind of gameplay it drives, because it's the first interaction. And if you want a game where combat's dangerous and it's tough to recover, everyone casts a few Cure Light Wounds, we're back in the fight, you might feel very unsatisfied with it. You might feel that you knocking hit points off people between a fight is irrelevant, and you might be right. So have a think about that and say, right, is this getting what I want out of the game? Or is this not getting what I want out of the game?
And conversely, if the players are... don't nickel and dime your players for 5 hit points at a time if you want hit points to matter. You should be making your... Each time they take damage, it's because they did a thing that exposed them to damage, not because you stepped in a rock, there's a dart trap or something.
Savage?
No, I think I've said my piece. I would observe that it is easy to become immune to the system if the only thing you have to worry about is your hit points. You can build your AC high enough or develop enough dodges or whatever. If you've got many different meters you have to watch, that if any of them drop to 0, then you're out or you're dead. Hit points become a lot less sort of single point of failure focused in the system, and you've got more things to play with there. I like the ease of use, but I dislike how easy it is to abuse that.
Yeah. And from a storytelling point of view, when you're telling stories about your game later, having cool critical injuries to talk about is more entertaining than, and I took 15 points of damage. which is a big deal at level 2.
I got a great arm.
You know, basically. So if you have had an experience where you've cut your own body part off in an RPG or had another really memorable injury, please contact us on our social media or our emails or our Discord and let us know about your tales of gory dismemberment or that frankly ridiculous thing where you fell off a mountain, took 503 points of damage, stood up with a bit of a limp and said, "Ooh, well, that was a bit harsh." And compare and contrast that with your real life injuries. But for now, this party's over.
You've been listening to The Adventure Party. We're a ragtag collective of desperate souls, striving for truth in a world of tabletop gone mad. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter. You can email us at party@theadventuringparty.net. Although, between you and me, the best place to track us down is Discord. Check the show notes for a link. This podcast released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, which is like free, but with extra steps. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week.